Erica, can you hear us?
I can, Autumn. Can you hear
Ooh,
me?
yay, we can. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, cool.
Are we ready? Yeah, we have quorum. Yeah, and Eric is online, and Ruben will be here momentarily. Speaking of, ta-da! All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 25th edition of the Planning Commission, Portland Planning Commission. I will be your chair, Steph Routh. Online, we have Commissioner Thompson, and in person, we have Commissioner Knowles, Vice Chair Spivak, Commissioner Ames, Commissioner Alvarado, and Vice Chair Pollock. Commissioners O'Meara and Brannon are unable to join us today, but are with us in spirit. I'd love to start. Today is primarily the Housing Bonus Alignment Project. It's a work session. Are there any items of interest from commissioners?
I have one.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to tell everybody, if you didn't already know, that Steph has been awarded the Empower Award from the Portland Thorns for recognizing a woman who has demonstrated reinvention, perseverance, and a powerful comeback. I have a feeling that the perseverance is the one that applies to you. Anyway, congratulations. I think that's a big honor.
Thank you very much, Team. You're very kind. Oh, thank you, Commissioner Nelson.
Did you accept that at the new practice facility?
I'm sorry?
Did you accept it at the new practice facility?
No, not at the new practice facility. But maybe they'll give me a
A tour. Yeah.
If we do, I'll invite everyone. I have one. Yes. 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 Thank you. Oh, that's very kind. We were just chatting before this. I've heard my item of interest, three truisms that continue to be true. One, everything is political except politics, which is personal. And two, if you get three Portlanders in a room, you'll have at least four opinions. And the third, that neither one nor two apply when it comes to Dolly Parton, because everyone loves Dolly Parton. And today we lost an incredible musician, a public servant who did so much for so many communities. And just want to appreciate the incredible people who use talent to make sure that children get to read. That's pretty neat. Other items of interest? I now feel very embarrassed and Okay, great. We'll go from that to our fearless Chief Planner Diefendorfer for the director's report.
Thank you so much, Chair Routh, and congratulations to you on your that award and recognition. Just really a couple of quick things to share. One is to let the commission know that the CEI Hub Policy Project is tentatively scheduled for City Council committee on September 16th. That item is slated to go to the Committee of the Whole, as far as we understand right now. So we'll update you further on that. That's tentatively what we think, what we're expecting for committee. And Vice Chair Spivak will be sharing the commission's recommendations during the committee meeting. So thank you, Vice Chair Spivak, for doing that for us. Also just wanted to, I think earlier today, Autumn Buckridge sent out an email to the commissioners about the recruitment that is underway. As you all know, 5 of the 9 of the commissioners have terms that are expiring in 2027. So we are undertaking a process to do a recruitment to fill those positions. And the bulletin for those positions is open now and will close through on September 14th. So thank you for helping to spread the word. We'd love to make sure that we have a really good, robust candidate pool representing, as you know, all the geographies of the city and also all the different expertise and specialties that help make the commission a very well-rounded body for reviewing the diverse projects that come to the Planning Commission. So we thank you in advance for that. And with that, I think that's all I have to report right now. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, from here we go, the consent agenda, which is composed entirely of our July 28th minutes. It's been a while since we have met. Is there a brave soul who would like to propose?
So moved.
Vice Chairs Pollock, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Commissioner Alvarado, all in favor? Yep. Any opposed? Okay, great. Lovely. We'll go straight, wasting no time, going straight into the Housing Bonus Alignment Project. This is a work session continued from our last meeting wherein we had a hearing. So Ariel Kane and Morgan Tracy, and if anyone has, I'm sorry, very, very briefly, this is a project which aims to revise zoning bonuses in multi-dwelling and mixed-use zones to increase the production of affordable, accessible, and family-sized housing units. We have two small pieces for Planning Commission beforehand. First, is there anyone who has a disclosure to offer?
I have a disclosure. In the time since the last meeting, I've held an informal discussion with two members of Portland Neighbors Welcome about the contents of the project after they submitted testimony.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I also, it has come, a few commissioners have chatted about one of the pieces from the hearing was a letter from three city councilors. And we kind of glossed over it last time, and I just wanted to acknowledge that as we're developing this new form of government and working to build the connective tissue between advisory bodies and our new legislative form of government, which is our city council. I think that there's been some questions and experiments in terms of how do we talk with each other and also members of the public in between hearing, but before hearing and then between hearing and from work sessions to when it gets on the city council docket. And so I know, there's, I don't remember in times past when we have had a letter come from city council. And I know that that's, some folks were asking like, what does this mean and where do we, how do we acknowledge this? So I just want to, if anyone has anything that they would like to share, they are welcome to do so at this time.
Well, that might be my cue. So generally, I'm, as a general matter, you've probably heard me say before that I'm concerned about anytime we short-circuit public process, the corrosive effect that has on the public's confidence, not only in our processes, but in the city council processes. I think people deserve to know that their business is being conducted in public. And I have a concern about the letter that we received because as written and as received, it conveys the impression that there's been a backroom deal with Portland Neighbors Welcome around these 3 or 4 amendments, and that as a consequence, a majority of our committee of jurisdiction has made a decision about what to do about those. And I think that whether that's true or not, it's that it creates the impression that the deal has been done, and people who are not very happy with that were not in the room and didn't have a chance to talk about it. It was talked about at the July 21st meeting with the Housing and Permitting Committee, but only as, here's the letter after our meeting with Portland Neighbors Welcome that we're going to send to the Planning Commission. They didn't invite any other testimony. They didn't ask anybody else to participate. So to me, that feels like a done deal. And if you're a neighbor to some RM3 zoning along North Interstate or out east, and you find out that, and you don't like those particular amendments, and you find out that this has been the transaction that's occurred, I think people are going to say, hey, what's changed from the last form of government? This is just more backroom deals. So I think it's really important to be mindful of that. Now, we are in a new situation, and I'm hoping that there are a couple of outcomes out of this letter being transmitted. One is that I'm hoping that Portland Neighbors Welcome will acknowledge the processes that we've had in place at the staff level and at the commission have been in place for a long time. When we have a project, the staff does an extensive amount of engagement with the community, and that becomes an input into the process and the recommendation that comes to us. In this case, those 4 or 3 amendments weren't presented to staff. They weren't analyzed, and they only surfaced, as I understand it, just before the public hearing. So we don't know if they're good ideas or not. I mean, I don't. There's been no analysis of them. So that, I guess I would hope that Portland Neighbors Welcome would be willing to adhere to those processes. They don't have to. They're certainly free to talk to city council, and they should, just like any other interest group. And by the way, I'd be just as concerned about this and a little ticked off if it was the Portland Chamber who had written to us during our consideration of the Central City Code amendments and said, we want you to do more surface parking, and then convinced a majority of the city council committee to tell us that. It's the same thing. It's an interest group having a conversation to which other people are not a party. So I think this is a moment to recognize that that is a risk, I think, to our process and to the confidence of the public. The other outcome out of this that I hope we can achieve is that we convene a conversation with the city council or with the relevant committee and talk about what our relationship should be. It really needs to happen. And this letter, whatever its intentions were, I think it's pretty clear they want us to adopt these 4 amendments. But let's set that aside. Let's talk about going forward how we address the relationship and how make sure they know what the Planning Commission's responsibilities are under city code to legislate and what the appropriate role is of the council as the ultimate deciders. So, oh, and then one other thing that we were just talking about, I think we would really benefit from having a retreat for us to start talking about sort of a more global vision. I don't know exactly what that means, but I just feel like we're in the weeds on amendments to the RM3 zone, and we ought to be thinking about how we improve livability in Gateway. That seems far more important and far more compelling. So I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Commissioner Knowles. And I know that we're, others have thoughts? Opinions? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Commissioner Thompson?
Yeah, well, Chair Rao, thank you for bringing this topic up and just creating some space to talk about it, because I have had a lot of questions myself about the letter that was sent to us. I've had my own personal reactions, and just with a degree of recent craziness, I haven't shared any of those with anybody else here. So I'm glad that we have a chance to talk about it as a group. I essentially agree with pretty much everything that Commissioner Knowles just shared in a very thoughtful and eloquent way. So I'm not going to try to re-summarize all of that, because I think that's a pretty good capture of where I'm at and some of my unease and question with the matter. And I guess the only thing that I would add is just a sense of confusion over why council would need to send such a letter to the planning commission, because there is an established process, and in the proverbial food chain, they are at the top and they can make proposed amendments and adopt or not adopt what comes before them. And so we've, have this in the 5 years I've spent on the commission, a very typical rhythm, which Commissioner Knowles described, and staff does the work, and there's engagement, and then there's refinement, and then it comes to the planning commission, and then we have our own we do our own metabolizing of that information and pass it forth, and then it goes to council. And so it just, I'm confused, frankly. And I think that for that reason, the recommendation to try to connect with the committee and just understand a little bit more about how we've worked before, and if there are shifts that are intended to that, just being able to have a dialogue about some of the potential implications or repercussions. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Others?
Yeah, I think this was kind of a second instance of something like this happening, the other being the renaming of Cesar Chavez, and kind of has a similar feeling or flavor of it, and it kind of just seems to circumvent the public process, and so I have a similar feeling about it.
Yeah, Vice Chair Spivak.
I think that City Council, I hope that they will take some time to think about if there's probably situations where City Council wants something done, and I think it seems like they're grappling with that. Like the way we get things done here is it goes through a planning process, and things don't meander. They don't always go the way that, and they eventually can, if they have the votes, they can switch it to make it whatever they want it to be. I've been reflecting back on a time, this has happened before. I mean, in the old form of government, when inclusionary housing passed, me and other commissioners were strong-armed, lobbied directly by city council members to make sure this thing happened. Like that was the last time. That's very rare, and it felt awkward then to have the pressure applied. And I feel like this somehow for me feels less awkward, just because it's like, that's just testimony. I don't have to give it any more. I shouldn't give it any more weight than anybody else's. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. But I feel like city council, I feel like if they wanted something to be in a project, I hope that they are in touch with staff through the executive branch early enough in the framing of a project to get their priorities at least be explored, rather than when it's in front of us. So I agree with that. I would say one thing, a slight deviation. I think it's okay for new ideas to come up with us that staff hasn't had a chance to evaluate yet. That's part of the public process. So some groups have already had conversations with staff. They're more likely to bring those up in the prior drafts. But if just some citizen shows up and has an idea, I think that feels fair game to me, without having been pre-vetted.
Thank you. Vice Chair Spivak. Anyone else have thoughts? Great. I mean, I think I'll tie a bow on this, and then we can get to the project at hand. Thank you for your forbearance and patience with us, team. But yeah, I think that this is a wonderful tension, and I think that like as we're developing this, I really appreciate folks having thoughts on it, and how do we move forward, and what lessons do we need to learn. We've also heard, how can we be a full partner with City Council? How can we ensure that these are a couple of questions that I've heard, and invite if I've misstated or missed any. But how do we be a full partner? Also, how do we ensure that that community members know how and when to engage, and how do we value people's time and the expertise that Portlanders bring to this, and give them a reasonable expectation that they can trust that their time and their expertise will be valued by this body and by city council. How do we ensure that that is happening as much as it can in public view, recognizing that, you know, conversations also happen while you're in line at the grocery store because this is Portland, and we are like 5 people big. Also, you know, what we've heard from CEI, like through CEI Hub, was community members' frustrations who had not been involved with anything planning commission related previously, and were surprised and frustrated that our oral and written testimony closed after a hearing, and that there were conversations that continued that they were not able, they were witness to but did not get to engage in on something that was closely felt by them before it goes to city council, which it in this case will next month. But you know, that's months of holding feelings, and feelings have a way of metastasizing over time. And so if not acknowledged. And so I think that there's a lot of things that we can talk about in a retreat and should do, and also hearing, you know, what is our going in future, what is the highest and best use of this body over the next couple of years, and how can we orient ourselves and our legislative body towards what will best serve the city that we all love. Did I miss anything? Okay. Great talk, team. Thank you. Okay. And now, Ariel, Morgan, Tom, please take us wherever you would like us to go.
Wherever you'd like us to go. Good evening. My name is Ariel Kane, Economic Planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, joined by Morgan Tracy, Senior Planner, Tom Armstrong, Supervising Planner, also at BPS. This is, as Commissioner Routh has already stated, a follow-up to the hearing that we held in July. So today, hopefully, can I just get a confirmation my screen is, there we go, great. Today, we're just gonna go over a few things. So a reminder of what our staff proposal was at the hearing. Commissioners asked for a little bit more information around project background and how we got to or didn't get to some of the proposals that testifiers brought up. We'll run through the items of interest that were mentioned by our testifiers, both in written and verbal testimony, as well as some of the items that commissioners had asked for additional information on. And we'll circle back to all of the potential paths forward that staff has identified and next steps for the project itself. For each section, when we get to the items of interest, we have a little section that identifies the potential path forward related to that item, which we hope is an opportunity for discussion around that topic. So we're not hoping to wait to the end to have conversation with you all. So the proposal that we had brought before you all last time was that Planning Commission recommends the council adopt the Housing Bonus Alignment Project proposed draft and amend Title 33 Planning and Zoning as shown in the proposed draft. Straightforward. And then apologies, I'm gonna see if I can pull my notes. So just to re-ground us in where this project came from. So the project was informed by the engagement that we did as part of the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy, which was adopted by City Council in December 2024 and recommended that summer by the Planning Commission. So this stems directly from the action C3, revised zoning bonuses and incentives, and this guided the scope of work as well as the grant funding that we pursued from the work. And it reads, this strategy aims to address the wide range of floor area ratio, density, and building height bonuses in the zoning code. The goal is to restructure the development incentives to support needed housing types, such as larger units, accessible units, and affordable housing to serve all household types, incomes, and needs. And this really served as the guide for how we scoped this project. Some commissioners had inquired about the proposals that testifiers had put forth and were not included in the proposed draft. Some of that is because of the general scope of the work being around bonuses and not about base zoning. But I just wanted to provide a little bit of background around the two organizations that proposed those majority of those changes. We provided presentations of the discussion draft, so our first public draft on February 14th and March 3rd, 2026. We did receive comments from these groups on the discussion draft. Most of them were supportive, with a few suggested changes, such as the elimination of the step-down requirement or an increase to the step-down height from 35 feet to 45 feet. Other issues were brought up related to the fire code conflicts and single staircase, etc. We did not receive requested FAR or setback changes to the base zone that was presented to the commission at that time. The proposed draft was released in June 15th, and our first knowledge of the requested amendments began with a phone call, a conversation on July 1st, with similar themes emerging during an in-person presentation on July 9th, and then we received the written comments when you all did from the group the week prior to the hearing. And then as summarized in our staff report, I won't go through all of this again, but we did do additional engagement for the project, including one-on-one interviews, in addition to other opportunities for Portland residents to participate. Okay. We have separated out the items of interest. So items sort of raised by our testifiers, and then items additionally raised by commissioners. There's some overlap, of course, as well. And so we hope that this will be conversational. I'll take us through the testifier section, hoping that Tom and Morgan will jump in as needed. And then we'll move through to the items that were raised by commissioners separate from the testimony. The first item, we really wanted to ground the commission and staff around model code compliance. I think that this hasn't been brought up necessarily before the Planning Commission. So many of the items of interest related to the base zone changes are related to the model code that the state adopted in the rulemaking process in December 2025. And so we just wanted to brief everyone on this. So the rulemaking process concluded in December 2025 with the adoption of the model code. There's a model code for small and medium and large cities. We are not currently subject to compliance with the model code as it stands for large cities. It may come up in our midterm reporting, which will happen in 2027 for our housing production strategy. There's a couple of instances where the model code may be applied to the city. It could be a part of the housing acceleration program if the city has not made adequate progress on our housing production strategy. And it's a multiple step process. So if we're referred to into the acceleration program and the state, when they conduct their audit, finds that our development code or zoning code standards are a barrier, and then the adoption of the model code may be an agreement that we have to come to with the state in order to move forward. Additionally, LCDC has the authority to apply the model code directly in an enforcement order as a part of this process. I'm going to jump to the RM3 stuff. So I guess if you have any questions about the model code, we're happy to answer them now as well too. But we can keep talking.
I mean, I've already posed a couple of questions directly to staff. I'm climbing the learning curve on this, and I'm not all the way there yet. I'm still a little, I'm not sure if I want to go into where I want to clear now because it's pretty wonky stuff. I think I might just say that staff might reach out for a couple of questions afterwards and leave it at that. Thanks.
This is Tom Armstrong. I think the takeaway that we're trying to say is it's not clear that the city is going to be forced to adopt the model code, and that there are many, many steps that will take 2 to 3 years before we get there in a situation where the state would be saying, yes, you got to do the model code. And I think you'll see when we get into the RM3 base zone discussion that the model code is not the best tool, right? It's a one size fits all for all cities greater than 25,000 people for the whole state. So, and that there's a lot of, in this process, there's a lot of back and forth between the city and the state to explore what are the barriers to production. Is it code base? Is it incentives? Is it other infrastructure or whatever to get at the production goals?
All right, a lot of the items were specifically related to the RM3 base zone changes that were proposed by testifiers. So just wanted to introduce you all to where our RM3 is distributed around the city. This is a map. The blue, that is not the river, is the RM3. Most of it is in our plan districts, not all of it. Some of it sort of bounds our central city plan districts as well. RM3 is intended to be a medium to high density multi-dwelling zone. It's along our civic corridors, served by frequent transit, close to commercial services. So you'll see a lot around Interstate, Gateway, 122nd. It's intended via our zoning code to be for compact urban development with a higher percentage of building coverage and strong building orientation to the pedestrian environment of streets. As it relates to the proposals by our testifiers, the main proposal is to increase the RM3 base FAR from 2 to 2.5. That's in alignment with a specific portion of the model code, which again is very wonky, but the model code for large cities is site size based, and it has a range of base FARs. Start at 1.5 and goes up to 2.5. And so the proposal was to do the highest FAR that's in the model code, 2.5. We have several zones already that exceed the model code FAR maximum. So RM4, RX, CM2, CM3, CE, CX, and EX. And in our RM3, as you saw there in plan districts, many of those plan districts already have a base FAR that is above that 2.5 proposal that's in the multi-unit model code. About 900 are around 4 to 1 FAR, and about 520 have our standard base FAR of around 2.1. And as we mentioned, the project wasn't scoped for or designed with the intention of complying with the model code, but still wanted to show you that this is the distribution right now of our lots as it relates to the proposal brought on by our testifiers. I see a hand.
Ariel, can I ask a quick question about this?
Yes.
The 520 lots that do still have a base FAR of 2 to 1, so that's like roughly a third. It looks like what plan, or what area on that map?
Yeah,
Does
it's a
that apply
little
to?
tough to see, I'm sure, but it's mostly around the outer edges of Central City and a little bit in that inner east area and a bit off to the side near 205.
Is it the dark blue areas on the map?
Yes, it's the darker blue areas on the map.
The gray or
The gray is the plan districts.
Can you try to point, use a cursor or something to point? Will that,
The way my screen sharing is it does not seem like it.
okay, so it is the blue,
Oh, it is the blue.
yeah.
Yes.
It's the
Okay.
gray is the plant district boundaries to demonstrate that it's largely, those areas are found, those properties that are zoned RM3 are found in the plant districts, but they're the blue areas.
So any dark blue area on here has a current base FAR of 2.
Except for where it overlays a plan district. So, sorry, my cursor's not doing a great job. So for example, all of these in the interstate plan district have a higher, I believe I can say all of them have a higher base FAR.
East Corridor.
And over, sorry, my cursor is not doing a great job. And over here in the East Corridor, plan districts as well.
Okay, I finally understand. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Summary. Okay. So on the model 1 I think I did get far enough researching this that the 1.5 FAR is really large sites. 2.5 is up to a half an acre. Do you think any of these sites are over half an acre, or many of them?
I would say not many.
Okay. And is there, the fact that we certainly have some zones that are higher density than RM3 and lower density RM1 is, I guess I thought that the fact that we have some that are higher listed here makes me think that the city's thinking about like some averaging thing. Is that the case? Like that on average, is it an on average test from the state, or you need to meet some, every multifamily zone lot needs to be over a certain, or in buildable areas, I guess? Yeah.
We don't know, because no city in the state has gone through this process and had to demonstrate their compliance with the model
So
code.
the rule doesn't say,
No. It's part of that negotiating process, part of their code audit, part of like, why is production, if you zoom back, I mean, at a very basic level, they look at what is your production compared to the region? Like, is everybody down? That's being in a different situation of, oh, you're lagging your peers. And the other is, well, how much capacity do you have available throughout your entire city in all of the zones, which we've shown that we have lots of capacity, lots of opportunity in a mix of zones. And so we just don't know, are they gonna, we have 4 or 5 different RM zones. Are they gonna average those when they only have one in their model code? So that's the negotiating process that you get into if you get into the acceleration program.
okay. And my last thought on this, I guess, is that there's in the memo is a discussion about, well, this is a big change, like, where's the outreach for it? It feels like if the RM3 zone were going to be applied more broadly, that's a big change, and there's a big process coming up. 520 lots doesn't seem like that big of a change in terms of outreach. Yeah. I get the scope creep claim concern also. Thanks.
Sure. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. I want to just provide a couple of reflections that I think could be helpful. And Tom, please correct me if I'm not right. But I think one of the things that's happening here is that model code from a state often is more binding. It's like the state passes a law and says, cities, you have to get in conformance with this. You either update your own codes to be in conformance with this, or you apply the model code. I think in this case, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think the model code in this case is almost like it's a model code that's designed to be applied to cities when they're not producing housing. So it's kind of a different permutation of a model code. And I think, in my view, it's really it's meant to be applied to a city when they are going through an assessment of how well they're doing in either producing housing or following up on their housing production strategies. And it's really designed to be applied to cities that are not, their zoning is very restrictive and they're not doing enough. I think that and you'll see in the analysis that you've seen in the memo and the analysis that you'll see through the PowerPoint presentation, that the city of Portland obviously is very large. We have many different zones, and we have zones that run the gamut, as Vice Chair Spivak said, but we have a lot of zones that exceed the base standards that are identified in the model zone. So I feel like it would be very unusual for the state to say that we're not in compliance. I mean, it depends on how they wield that, and I think it depends on whether they determine at that midpoint evaluation whether we're doing well on the scorecard or not. Does that make sense? Yeah, and I think we could demonstrate that our zoning is commensurate with the basic objectives that the model code is trying to advance.
Yes, I'm not as sure about that. I feel like not how much multifamily housing is being built in our city right now. And the standard, if I think I found it right, is that either we have to adopt the model code or alternatively demonstrate that locally applied land use regulations facilitate the same or comparable development outcomes to the model ordinance. And I totally get that there's going to be a discussion about what that means. From my vantage point, the verdict's out on that. So anyway, I'll be curious to see how it goes. But I guess it feels like it's, we're doing a lot in the city to try and get housing to happen. There's no question about that. If someone determines that zoning is a barrier, because we've zoned some areas high density, like Gateway, where no one's using it, and we zone other areas low density, and people wish they could use it, then that's gonna, I would hope, actually, I would hope the state would step in to push back on that. So I'm willing to see.
Well, maybe a couple counterpoints or additional thoughts to that. One thing, just thinking about the scope of or the scale of the change, the 520 lots, back to that point. You could kind of also look at it from the inverse of that, which is what is the net delta effect of a 0.5 FAR increase on 520 lots in terms of our overall housing production. And I guess the other thing, just reflecting back on the interviews that we conducted with developers, we heard on multiple occasions, we are at a point where zoning is not the barrier. It is financing. But we are still making efforts to increase incentives, so when the market does convert, change over, that we're in a better position to get the types of units that we're looking to get.
So, this kind of raises for me the question. So the proposal from Portland Neighbors Welcome, I mean, if we did those things, is there any evidence that it's going to lead to some sort of housing production miracle? Why is this an emergency?
Well, I think when we go through the other RM3 base zone changes that were proposed, I think one of the options that we put forward is, and one of the things that I read into the Portland Neighbors Welcome letter and some of the discussions we've had, is they see the RM3 zone as a tool for the Inner East area plan process that is just getting started now and would involve remapping and could involve the broader application of RM3, and they want that tool to be in place. As the flip side of that from our perspective is that you could have these base zone changes and make those changes and talk about those changes with the wider community as part of that Inner East Side planning process.
Right. To me, that's the right place to be doing it, because there hasn't been engagement about that as part of this project. This is about bonuses, right?
Yes.
So why now? I just don't get, and the letter that they sent doesn't explain why this is so urgent that they need to do a end around the planning commission to try to get the council to do what they want. Just curious, which is why I don't know why.
I suggest, why don't we go through the rest of the RM3 proposals and then we can figure out which direction you guys want to go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I believe this is my last slide about the FAR, but I believe Commissioner Thompson had just asked for some examples of what the RM3 development is looking like these days. So we went and we looked at a couple of recent projects. Just both are interstate plan district areas. That's where a lot of the development for RM3 has happened lately. So those are the best examples we had. So on the left-hand side is I believe it's like a 2.03 to 1 FAR, so a little bit above that base FAR. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is using our maximum up to the bonus maximum right now of 5 to 1 FAR. Both are in that again, interstate plan district area. Continuing the base zone changes related to RM3, so testifiers proposed also reducing the RM3 base front setback from 10 feet to 5 feet. We just wanted to talk about the existing code regulations and some of the flexibility that's already provided to reduce front setbacks. So right now, it's 10 feet, except it may match the adjacent lot setback if it's smaller. It can be reduced to 5 feet when ground floor is raised. It can also be reduced to 0 feet when an entry courtyard is proposed, or if a portion of the building is commercial or community room space, with some exceptions. And additionally, as part of this project, we've added some additional siding flexibility where we've proposed that for buildings over 55 feet tall that use the height bonuses as a part of this, that the side and rear setbacks can remain at 5 feet as opposed to increasing to 10 feet as well. So we've also included that in this as part of our staff proposal. Okay. The next base zone change that was a part of this conversation was to eliminate what was termed a balcony mandate in our open space requirements. It was a little less clear to staff if this was a request about RM3 explicitly or if it was more broadly about the multi-dwelling and mixed-use zones. So we also just wanted to talk about some of our existing code regulations. So the common area requirement that we have right now can be met in a few different ways. So applicants can choose to provide that individual outdoor area, which we do often see manifest as balconies, or it can be a common outdoor area, can be on top of or integrated into the structure, or it can also be provided as space on the ground. I believe one of the examples that we showed for RM3 had that. Additionally, it can be provided as a common indoor area, such as a community room, which we've heard can be less expensive per square foot and is not counted against floor area maximums as well.
Mary, well, I'm sorry. Can I ask another question
Yes.
on the balconies? So why is it being framed as a balcony mandate? Is it like, is there some challenge that developers are finding in making use of the common outdoor area option or the common indoor area option? Or is it just that the balcony option is the option that otherwise most allows them to maximize unit area on the site?
I'm not sure why it was framed as a balcony mandate. As Mariel explained, we do have other options there. And since the hearing, I've been paying very close attention to recent developments to see how frequent balconies are part of the development. So completely anecdotal, don't have data on this, but I do see a wide variety of high-density, intense apartment development that is built without balconies. So obviously, they're providing interior common space or a smaller outdoor area for common area use. So I think, just sort of reflecting back on a number of these suggestions that have come forward from Portland Neighbors Welcome, it has given us the opportunity to dig into it a little bit and maybe fact check. And I'm not going to call it myth busting. It's just a little bit of sharing the context of what else the code already provides that we may not have, or they may not have been privy to when the suggestions came to the commission. So I think this is potentially one of those, that there are other options on the table already. Yeah, I don't know if that helps answer your question,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
It does. Yeah, thank you.
I guess I think this is a little different. The prior two items are technical nitpicking code, trying to groom it for broader adoption. This one, I was on the planning commission when we instituted these requirements. We heard a lot of testimony about affordability. I feel like that was at a time when we were building a lot of housing. I think I agree that the balcony mandate is not right. There's other options, but those options have costs also. And I think that there's a drive to try and reduce costs. And I feel I feel sympathetic to that. I'm not someone who's ever built at this scale. I've also never built a balcony. But I feel like this stuff costs money, and it oftentimes people have to pay that into their rent, whether they have the benefit of a common area, a balcony, or not. It's part of the rent. There's not a choice there. It goes beyond building code. So I'm telling you, I feel that we might have gone too far in requiring spaces that are sometimes nice, sometimes they're used to park a bicycle, 4 stories up. If somebody really wanted to just park a bicycle, maybe they wouldn't have had to pay the money towards the rent to build it in the first place. And there's not that's the choice piece. Common interior areas are similar too. There's buildings that have large common interior spaces. We heard about this with the bike parking project that don't get used. So everyone in that building is paying rent towards creating that space. Was that a good requirement? I'm not sure. I mean, people could live in a building that has a space like that, or they could live in a building that doesn't have a space, that just have their own room. That is a cost that's foisted on everybody in a building subject to this code, one way or the other. So I am more sympathetic now than I was perhaps then. Now that we're not building almost anything, it seems like there's a cost here.
Vice Chair Spivak, can I ask? Sorry, I just took a bite, so I'm just going to do this. Is it primarily that the fact that we are not building housing that makes you more sympathetic? Are there other reasons?
The other reason is just the choice. Like, I feel like, well, we had this with parking spaces. If you have to build 1 parking space per unit and you don't have a car, do you want to be paying part of your rent towards building all those parking spaces you're not using? It's the same dynamic. I'm more sympathetic to open spaces than I am to parking spaces, but still it's this like, there's some ad, like a insurance thing, I only want to buy what I want kind of thing. Like, it kind of applies. Like, if I'm never going to use a balcony, I'm never going to go into the common, I live in a co-housing community. Some people never go into the common areas. If that's like not a priority for your living situation, it is a little odd for the city to require the builder to put it there for you, because it's going to flow into your cost of housing one way or the other. So that's so I think that dynamic is true whether we're building a lot of housing or very little housing. So it's independent of that, but I'm more sensitive to it now that we're not building housing.
Thank you very much.
I think we have a couple more slides on this open space issue.
Some of the context that was provided by testifiers was the prevalence or proximity to different parks and natural areas as one reason why open space on site might not be advantageous. So we just wanted to share a little bit of context and a little bit of analysis that we had available to us. So Portland Parks and Rec level of service guidance. So that's the map that's sort of on the right-hand side shows the half-mile level of service from developed parks and natural areas. It notes that the city is short by approximately 24% of the play area assets required to cover basic household access within a half mile. And as the amount of building coverage increases, the remaining unbuilt space on a site leaves a little less room for trees, landscapes, or places to socially interact or play. Some common space area is a way to help mitigate that. And we also just wanted to highlight that we did do a lot of engagement on other projects that noted the importance to individuals either living in affordable or senior and disabled housing about the importance of common space or open space to them on site. So the housing production strategy, the age and disability inclusive neighborhood action plan. We also, better housing by design that was referenced. And we also have comprehensive plan policies that ask us to look at housing quality, healthy and active living, and responding to social isolation. So we're looking at those as well when we're thinking about the open space policy as well. Okay, so this is our first sort of potential paths forward slide. We'll have this around the other sections as well. This is for those base zone changes. So the RM3 FAR, RM3 setback, and also that separate base zone open space requirement. We have a couple of comments and options that we've thought about here that we'd love to have a conversation with you all about. Generally, right now, staff is not recommending changes to base zone requirements with this project. I think we've talked a bit about this due to the type and focus of engagement around housing bonuses and not around base zoning. The other option, the first option that we've outlined as well is that staff would recommend addressing, if the issue is around the Inner East Area Plan, and that is the focus of those zoning changes, including that process with more robust engagement around RM3. And then the other option could be moving forward with base zone changes in alignment with the state model code, specifically as it's been proposed to apply that 5-foot setback and also increase the base FAR from 2.1 to 2 to 1 to 2.5 to 1. We can keep going to the other sections if that's fine. If there's, yeah, let's keep going. All right. Okay. So the other item that we had from our testifiers was removing, well, there were a couple of things that came up in our written and verbal testimony. So removing step downs from base zones entirely, and then also in our counselor letter, there was retaining the changes that we made to the step down requirements from the discussion draft to the proposed draft. So that change included eliminating the step down height on the side of the building that is across the street from a single dwelling zone when the project is using a bonus. That had been generally supported, and that was a result of considering the public comment that we received on the discussion draft. So we also, as a part of that discussion draft, proposed draft change, had made a decrease in, apologies, an increase, it's always the inverse, increasing the height limit from 35 to 45 feet when a site is abutting, so is next to a single dwelling zone. And we heard support for this change, and as I mentioned, from the letter from the counselors and design commission. And we had also heard, as part of the discussion draft engagement we had done, some concern from residents around the potential impacts on privacy and sunlight, et cetera, around removing step downs entirely. So we included a little bit of analysis that's both in our staff report, but also in our memo to you all around the lots that are potentially affected. So this is the base base zone if it is next to a single dwelling zone. So potentially 21% of RM2 zones might have a step down height applied, CM2, 26%, CE, 16%. Of course, that's also based on what design choices a developer might make for their site, et cetera. So the potential paths forward that we've outlined for this, the first option is no change to our proposal. The other options include removing the step down height limit when bonuses are used. And then the third is removing the step down height limit entirely from base zone requirements. And then, as I mentioned, we generally are not recommending making base zone changes as a part of this project. So we've noted that here too.
Well, I guess I've always been of the opinion that step downs are expensive. So I'm probably going to want to look at one of these changing options for this. And I'm also hopeful that when we do end up doing more mapping, we end up mapping full blocks rather than half blocks, which would address a lot of these conflicts. So I'm not sure which one yet, though. I have to think about it more.
I just want to echo my at least initial support for option 2, both here and in the RM3 zoning.
Commissioner Thompson, please.
Yeah, I mean, thinking ahead to the Inner East Side project, I feel like there could be an unintended consequence with removing or reducing step down requirements from a community concern standpoint, like when that project goes forward, and that feeling like there's going to be more development that is perceived by being out of scale with the neighborhood could increase resistance. And so if this is something that we do now, again, not as part of that, how do we then deal later on with the fact that we're very unlikely to modify it once as part of that project. You know, it's like get it right once. So I am feeling persuaded by the staff's recommendation to defer this until that project, when we can have more engagement and holistically understand community opinions on impacts of that.
Okay, great, thank you. Others? Yeah, Commissioner Nelson.
Well, I'll just restate what was probably obvious from my comments. I am not going to be in favor of any proposal that was not included in the proposed draft and for which there has not been public engagement.
Yeah, Vice Chair Spivak.
I've got a question for staff. As staff is scoping out the Inner East Side for All project, is staff expecting that to be a mapping project or mapping plus zoning, where some of the zoning changes would potentially be citywide? And so I'm thinking about like outreach level, like some of the, I think you understand, this project is citywide zoning, right? Expecting some level of outreach to affected parties historically and between now and council. If the Inner East Side for All project would potentially, anyway, I think I've got, if it's going to be, if zoning's on the table for that, some of those zoning districts apply in the Inner East Side and all over the city. Like, I'm just wondering what staff thinks about this.
Commissioner Spivak, or Vice Chair Spivak, I'll just share initially. I mean, obviously, we're still very early in that project and haven't made any final decisions on that, so to speak. But I would say that this is percolating as an issue. I do think, and this is why staff's recommendation is, if anything, if there's a real interest on the part of the commission for us to look at this, to allow us to do so through that project. It is primarily a mapping project, but I think we always know that issues come up that we have to address. And I don't think it is out of scope or out of the question that we would, in a hopefully a surgical way, think about the base zones and if the base zones need updating, and understanding that will be making a change citywide, and our outreach will have to be tailored accordingly. So all this to say that I think that it would be appropriate to take that up in that project, knowing that it'll apply to the Inner East Side, but also more broadly potentially.
Meaning that when it comes back to us, if we have ideas for, like, if the zone change ideas, so no one's going to tell us you can't do that because it's too much outreach. That's, at what point do we get shut down at that point if we're going to do changes to the zones? That's the question.
I think part of that is us having an opportunity to have a conversation with you at certain intervals about what the commission's interested in us looking at in the context of that project. I mean, obviously we can't, it would be very difficult to rewrite every zone as a part of that project, but if there's some strategic updates to base zoning that we could do that seem reasonable and that help us accomplish the goals, that seems reasonable to me.
Great question, thank you. Commissioner Thompson.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I understood Patricia's first response to Commissioner Spivak, and that I'm understanding correctly whether or not there is the potential for the number of impacted RM sites to increase as part of the Central East Side project in a significant way. I mean, with the numbers that Ariel was showing earlier, it's like, okay, well, it's only, 500 sites out of this many total. If I'm understanding correctly, that could increase dramatically as part of the Central East Side project. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that's a fair statement, Commissioner Thompson. I mean, I think if that project is looking at rezoning sites, and the RM3 zone is one of the zones that we could potentially rezone to. So
Okay.
that number could increase substantially.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, my reaction then is, if we know that that's coming and we know that that's a priority and that's actively being worked on now, what is the actual urgency? Like, in the current economic climate, like, if we agree to all of the amendments from Portland and Neighbors Welcome, what's really going to happen? Like, what is going to be the net benefit that is added? I don't know. It could be zero. Quite literally, it could be zero before the Central East Side project actually goes into effect. Conversely, if we put all of these amendments in now without understanding the impacts or having done any outreach, I see a lot of potential harm and unintended consequences and community perception issues that I'm worried about. And I am generally in favor of undoing or really trying to like look at impediments to housing development, but it feels like a red herring. It feels like there's nothing here. And so let's just focus on the bonuses and then come back when we can really talk about the thing holistically.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Others? A few things that I'm hearing, just to test my listening comprehension. In the housing bonus project, is it in scope or is it out of scope to address base zones? And is there enough merit to some of the amendments to either consider here, or would Inner East Side be a better container for it? But also, can we be sure if we were to defer it to that near term, that future project, would that then be considered out of scope, or how much are we kicking a can down the road because it doesn't fit here? Also ensuring that community members know when they should be testifying or showing up to consider a specific scope of a project. Does that sound right? That's generally, okay, great.
Okay, that was our last base zone item. We have a couple, I think this is our last bit from our testimony, and then we'll jump into the additional planning commissioner items. This is an item that was mentioned in 2 written pieces of testimony. It is also related to the model code, but it is a bonus, so we have it separated out. We had testimony that requested a revision to the deeper housing affordability bonus to conform to the 90-year moderate income cooperative housing bonus from the model code. In short, a moderate income social housing bonus. While we're not required, again, to adopt the model code right now, I just wanted to reference the model code bonus language. It's fairly short. So it says residential property in which all of the units, so 100% of the units, must be subject to a zero equity, limited equity, or shared equity ownership model, including co-ops, community land trusts, making them affordable to moderate income households at 80 to 100%, 80 to 120% AMI for a period of 90 years. I also wanted to address Commissioner O'Meara in this section had also expressed interest in incentivizing that 0 to 30% area median income housing as well. And we sort of lumped those together here. We elevated a couple of items related to this in a separate memo. Essentially the issue of moderate income incentives, 10-year limits, and also model code compliance. We've touched on the model code compliance so far, but housing tenure is referring to those, essentially the legal or financial arrangements under which a person or household occupies a living space. So often that is referring to renters or owners. That definition is expanding a bit to include cooperative ownership or those limited equity models. Right now, as it stands, Title 33, our zoning code, remains tenure neutral. So we don't explicitly have tenure written into the zoning code. Right now, that is managed as by PHB as part of their administrative body, where they regulate both the affordability in tenure in Title 30 and an administrative rule. Additionally, PHB is also undertaking a study on social housing and these other alternative housing ownership models to better understand the approaches and models that the city could use to increase non-market housing opportunities. So they have a specific focus on mixed income social housing, limited equity cooperatives, and alternative financing tools as well. The timeline for that study in particular is going to be submitted to council, I believe, this week. And there will be a presentation, I believe, to Housing and Permitting Committee in this fall as well. We also know simultaneously PHB and Prosper are working to adjust different income levels for their financial incentives, both for the TIF set aside and other alternative funding models. And the inclusionary housing recalibration study is also a part of our housing production strategy items. And that timeframe should be starting to kick up within the next couple of months, and is another opportunity for considering the range of incentives. So not just zoning, but additional incentives for regulated affordable housing. We put up some range just of affordability bonuses, both as we have them, and then the bottom line is just showing the state's moderate income housing bonus. There are other affordable bonuses in the model code, but this is the one that was specifically pulled out by testimony as it compares to the different levels of affordability. So IH ranges from 60 to 80% AMI level, if it's, 60 to 80 for renters, and then it's 80 to 100% AMI for ownership. And then for deeper housing affordability, it's 60% AMI for renters and 80% AMI for owners. And then in comparison, the 80 to 120% for our moderate income. We've included a couple of paths forward that are possible. So first, we do recommend deferring new income and tenure-based bonus options until the social housing study and IH recalibration study have been completed. We don't want to preempt the work that the PHB staff are developing as part of the study. They have a robust technical group that is advising them. Another option could be, to be responsive to Commissioner O'Mara's comments, could be to revise our DHA bonus to add scaled affordability bonus by income level, again, being tenure neutral. So for example, we already have community land trusts that are using our deeper housing affordability bonus. We're not excluding it to renter or owner. There is access already for, I'm blanking on, the way that PHB manages those kinds of ownership models is possible through a CLT right now with the bonuses that we have. That was the end of that sentence. Apologies. So that was,
I'll just add with that second option, one of the concerns we've heard is from the Housing Bureau and what it would take to stand up an administrative program for that moderate income, because essentially the developers or the owners of the property have to have a covenant that says they're going to promise to keep the rents in that income range. And then there's an annual compliance and reporting requirement that is both on the owners of the property and then up to PHB to process and monitor and enforce. And so there is a concern on that administrative burden, and we've also heard the concern from developers as to how attractive it would be if they have to do this covenant. Obviously, it's something that affordable housing developers and land trusts are used to, and so that may be more accessible from their end of the range. But there is an administrative aspect to expanding the income ranges.
I vote for option one.
Okay, you're going to get a break from me, and Morgan is going to move us to commissioner items.
I feel like we might need a little stretch. We're a little more than halfway there.
And Ariel, you are always like such an amazing presenter, and your delivery is so clear and your points are so well made that I just wanted to express that.
And apologies for what's coming next. So in addition to the commissioners' discussions related to the items that were raised in testimony, there were a few more items that were raised by the commissioners themselves. Commissioner Spivak gets a high billing here. We're going to start by tackling a couple closely related items together from Commissioner Spivak. This is the accessibility bonus and the multi-bedroom bonus. So for the accessibility bonus, Commissioner Spivak noted an interest in potentially limiting who can reside in accessible units to preserve them for folks with disabilities. He also expressed interest in boosting the accessibility bonus by adding additional levels or tiers to that bonus. I think you'll hear one overarching response from staff is our interest in not overcomplicating the bonus system. So just as we're talking about different options, you might hear some tension or not necessarily resistance, but sort of potential guidance in trying to keep that from being overcomplicated. As we have observed with the current version of the multi-bedroom bonus, so this goes back to the restricting the tenancy, the occupancy for the accessible units. Restrictive covenants can discourage developers and investors as they both limit who may be eligible to rent the unit and add administrative complexity and exposure for noncompliance. It may also overlap and complicate OHSCS and Department of Human Services programs that have their own residency requirements for certain types of their funded projects. I will note that the proposal does include a requirement that the units, the accessible units, are clearly labeled on the plans, and this could aid in the development of an accessible unit inventory, as also called out in our housing production strategy, in order to increase the awareness of where these types of units are located to better connect those tenants with the units. With regard to adding more levels of accessible bonuses, the proposed draft anticipated stacking the IH bonus, inclusionary housing bonus, with the multi-bedroom and accessibility bonus. So when you see all those increments of bonuses, and I'll go through a table in a little bit, that's how we sort of set that program up. And we'll come back in a couple slides to explore that a little further. Next slide. So with regard to the multiple bedroom bonus, Commissioner Spivak was also concerned that the unit sizes may be too restrictive. First, I just want to highlight that there is no size limit for units that are not being used to meet the bonus, so the 2 or 3 bedroom.
I can save some time. I read the memo. I'm going to drop this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I had great talking points.
I'm sure you did. I'm just saving us all a little time.
All right. Appreciate the.
Based on the consistency with what you're already doing in Central City, which my instinct is that there have to put guardrails on this, because someone could just take a penthouse suite and, label the office a bedroom and then make it bigger. So I wanted to block off the big add-on ones, but these are basically, it's not just a 2-bedroom bonus, it's a multi-bedroom reasonably priced bonus. And if that's part of the name of it in practice, that's fine. Yeah.
We just wanted to keep the name shorter. Yeah. Appreciate that. Okay. So I think we moved to,
Going.
what? Keep going?
Yeah, there we go.
All right. So back to the idea of creating more levels of accessible bonuses. As I mentioned, we want to keep the bonuses as straightforward as possible. We don't want to introduce new types of accessibility specifications, so we have a type A and a type B standard that are pulled directly out of the state building code. So I'm hoping we're not talking about some other version of accessible unit. That would be sort of a higher level. We will already count those toward meeting our accessibility bonus. The accessibility bonus already has 2 options. One's designed for smaller townhouse development, and the other is designed for larger apartments. The multi-bedroom bonus also has 2 options. One designed to allow incremental additional floor area, 1 unit at a time. The other offering FAR height and coverage when 25% of the units are meeting that bonus requirement. But one way to increase the number of accessible units would be to allow the bonuses to double up, which is not part of our proposal as you have received it. So for example, in this context, a project could be designed with twice the number of accessible units. So the current bonus is 25% of the units have to be type A. This would require that 50% of the units you could get double the bonus floor area, height, et cetera. We could do a similar type approach for the multiple bedroom bonus, which could be doubled up when twice the number of those units are provided. So This table kind of shows how this would play out. For the examples in this table, we're assuming that all the projects would have development with at least 20 units. So IH is kind of current, sort of the baseline, and always part of the mix. And we're only going to focus on these 5 zones so our brains don't explode. The top row is showing the base FARs across the top row. The next row is showing the proposed maximum limit when multiple bonuses are combined, and this could include deeper housing affordability bonus. So depending on how things are stacked, in some cases you might see some bonus FARs left on the table, such as in the RM1 zone. So with the double stacking, you get up to 2.75. When you hit the upper limit at 2.5, you're going to leave some floor area on the table. And in other cases, reaching the full max would require meeting some other type of bonus, like the deeper affordable bonus, such as an RM3. The 2 rows on the bottom show how the accessibility or multiple bedroom could be doubled up. And then the basic value proposition here is that rather than stacking to get both accessible and multi-bedroom units, a builder could alternatively choose to double down on one or the other, either twice the number of accessible units or twice the number of multi-bedroom units, or decide to provide a mix. So with regard to establishing locally enforced occupancy limits on accessible units, staff is not recommending the commission make this change due to additional complexity in making the bonus less attractive for use. We also feel that for the purposes of greater code consistency, it would be better to maintain the unit size limits as set by the Central City Code update. As for increasing the availability of the accessible bonus, we want to acknowledge enabling double bonuses would add some additional complexity in the code, but should not be impractical to construct. So I think we can find a way to do it. I haven't talked to our code writer about that, but we'll make sure it can happen. You can always opt to make no change. That's always an option. Or if you want to explore change, you may wish to double up on just the accessibility bonus or the multi-bedroom bonus or both, as we've discussed. So I'll leave it to the commission to chat about that.
I think that the only one I'd be considering is allowing doubling up the accessibility bonus. I wasn't even thinking about the doubling up the bedroom bonus. So, and then my thinking was, I think we did get testimony on this, if I recall correctly. Maybe not, but I thought I heard it. Just to make that, basically you do twice the number of accessible units you would have done, and you get, instead of you get 1 instead of 0.5, it was a way of just putting more parity of that bonus with some of the other ones. It would be a little more complicated, but not that much. So I'm not sure if that, I didn't totally, if that were the only thing on the table, I'm not sure how much that impacts the earning. This would tend to, I guess the other thing that went through my head is that this bonus gives you, is it 5 feet? What's the height?
Right, you can get.
So it's like, what do you get for 5 feet? Like someone might want to get a whole nother floor, so just make double the units accessible. Like it's sort of, it might work out physically for a building to double the number of accessible units so you can get a whole floor out of it. Yeah. I'm not feeling strongly on this item, but I think I heard some testimony on it, so bring it up as an option.
Okay, well, appreciate that. Continuing on the theme of Commissioner Spivak, also inquired about the proposed incentive to build into, the proposed incentive built into the planned development bonus for mass timber buildings. The commission noted that from the standpoint of carbon sequestration, mass timber benefits were not really realized until you got to much bigger buildings. The incentive in the planned development bonus is to unlock taller buildings, taller building heights on sites between 40,000 and 80,000 square feet in size. So the extra height bump doesn't really come into play until you get around 65 feet for RM2, and it's taller in the other zones. So the type of mass timber buildings that would benefit from the incentive are limited to those taller, larger scale developments. I'm not sure if that addresses the issue you were raising, but I did learn a little bit about carbon sequestration when I did a little research on it.
I guess I'll give my sympathies to the staff assigned to do this research. The analysis in the memo was from an extended blog post. It wasn't really analysis. Like there's, I think that, so luckily the city has great resources for this. Like we've got builders like Walsh who built this stuff and priced out lots of options. We have Earth Advantage is headquartered here. They're great building science people. the consensus is, despite the fact that public agencies and some foundations love doing mass timber and short buildings, the environmental benefits are not there until you're substituting for concrete. So that's 8 stories plus, right? And I get a little bit of just seeing how much mass timber is being put into smaller buildings with an environmental justification, it kind of rings me wrong a little bit. And so I feel like if we were going to drop something from this, simplify this project, we would just get rid of this whole section. Even if mass timber, I mean, you guys have built mass timber, I'm looking, like, I think the sole case of mass timber doing a great job of substituting for concrete was a 12-story building, which cost more than concrete, but in theory, they saved a little bit of money by building it faster, right? So that's the good case. And it's probably possible to groom this in a way that I would be fine with it, to say that you only get this bonus if you actually build mass timber in a building that was 8 stories or more. You know, I'm sure there's a way to write that more narrowly in there. But even then, I'm not sure if you want to give more entitlements for a project that's built in a certain construction method. It just seems kind of odd. So I'd be curious for staff if we were considering dropping this, would you just make the available this tall building allowance available however you built the building, or would you just say leave it with the base code and don't do a incentive?
Well, when we developed the incentive, it was in response to some information that we received, and there was a lot of excitement around.
There's a lot of excitement around it, there's no question.
Yeah, and how can we try to get the construction industry to start pivoting toward this, and maybe throw a little something on the pile that's in addition to what you get with a concrete type building. There is a little bit of, in terms of form concern in our conversation around step downs and that kind of thing. The 40,000 square foot site is basically a city block. So when you're talking about some of these zones and going to 75, 85, 120 feet, the intention around the PD bonus was to allow for some transitioning down around the edges, which you can do on larger sites. That was sort of the idea. You put the tall stuff in the middle and you transition towards the edge. When we got to these small sites, that got more difficult to do. So that's why we called for lower height limits in the smaller sites, but tempered that with this excitement around mass timber. We're like, well, let's give it a shot. So if we were to choose between those two options, I think we would just write out the incentive for mass timber and just leave the height limits as they're shown.
Commissioner Thompson and then Commissioner Knowles.
Yeah, as I looked into this more, I'm not as concerned about a potential carbon downside for this, because with the bonuses at 75 feet minimum, you're already exceeding what you would build with wood framing. And I can't imagine a scenario where somebody would say, let's build to like 50 feet out of mass timber and actually displace like the wood framing that would make sense with that. So I guess it feels like very catered to like projects that want to go as tall as possible, taller than you would do with wood framing. And then there's a bonus that makes that possible. That's the way that I'm understanding this. I would like confirmation of that from staff that is correct and that is the intent. And then I have a question, which is why does it apply to sites that are more than 40,000 square feet instead of 40,000 square feet or more?
Gotcha. Oh, wow. So first, confirming that the incentive basically gives projects built out of mass timber additional height above basically gives them the allowance to go to 75, 85, 95 feet, 120 feet based on the zone. So yes, it's really intended for buildings above 65 feet tall in RM2 or above 75 feet in RM3 or 85 feet in RM4, et cetera. So I'm confirming your understanding of that. In terms of why it starts at 40,000 square foot, the original plan development bonus was a 2-acre site size minimum, and we reduced that in recognition of the general lack of 2-acre plus sites across the city to 40,000 square feet. So we were basically going from 80,000 plus to 40,000, and we created these two categories of height limits around that plan development bonus. So below 40,000, you wouldn't be eligible to apply for a plan development and achieve the plan development bonus, but we have other types of height bonuses that would get you some level of
Okay.
equivalency.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I don't know if Commissioner Ames would be willing to weigh in, but like, is there do you think it's likely that this would introduce or incentivize mass timber in applications where mass timber is not the most efficient solution from like a wood fiber standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, the thing so it has to be a mass timber project on a 40,000 square foot plus site. That's the only way. I mean, so Julia West, we built that. That's like an 8th block or 6th block or something. So that wouldn't be applicable. I guess I don't understand why it needs to be a 40,000 square foot site for a mass timber project. Because mass timber in that application lended itself pretty well because it was an urban environment and there's a lot of efficiencies to gain by being able to put the erector set together, so to speak. And so, that's what I would question. But yeah, I think it could incentivize, more mass timber production. But yeah, the 40,000 square foot, I think, I kind of question that a little bit. Why limit it for, on that size site?
So perhaps I haven't given enough context around this bonus. So they're in the base zone. You can see on the top row there the base height limits. The other bonuses that we talked about, the deeper housing affordability, inclusionary, accessible, multiple bedroom bonus, they come with additional height increments that can bonus up to a different maximum that are generally consistent with that middle row. The plan development bonus was really intended as a sort of overarching, if you've got a large site, you're going to do a sort of what's equivalent to a master plan through this plan development process. And so we were finding maybe there's a bit of a extra incentive we can do on those cases when they're mid-size sites, 40 to 80,000 square feet, to give those mass timber projects just a little bit of a boost. But if you are the Julia West in Central City, which isn't part of the scope of this project, but say it was a similar zone elsewhere, you could still go up to that height plus the bonus through other means to get additional height. You wouldn't have to go through the plan development bonus to get it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think any way to promote mass timber construction, I think, is a net positive. I mean, it's something that could be really good for our state's economy if it, continues to make sense. So any way we can incentivize it. We look very often at different building materials, whether it's conventionally wood frame project or a concrete project or mass timber. And I mean, it's in most applications, it still doesn't make any financial sense to build with mass timber. So we got to be doing things like this to incentivize it because it's just not there yet. Yeah, there are good consequences like speed at which you can build, but I think what we've seen is that that incremental speed is not what I think everybody intuitively believes it to be. But yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Knowles and then Vice Chair Spivak.
Just going to ask, are there examples of residential buildings that have been built with mass timber here in Portland?
Yes.
Or anywhere? I guess I don't care. I'm just curious.
Yeah, we've got Julia West House, which is in the West End. It's a 12-story mass timber building. It's, I believe it's senior affordable housing. And we just completed that a year ago, something like that. Yeah. And then there's another one in Broadway corridor, I believe it's proposed. It's a little bit taller than that. And I think it's over concrete. I think it's got a podium and then it's mass timber above that. But yeah, not a lot. I mean,
There's a cottage cluster in Oregon City with like land trust. The state of Oregon just did a carve out of $25 million of affordable housing money for modular mass timber construction, which I believe all those funded projects are short, like pretty small.
We also, the Portland Housing Bureau is also doing a mass timber pilot study right now with several developers for more mass timber projects, I believe, funded in part by the Pro HUD housing grant that they received as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson, you were issuing a.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add more to the list. Fremont and Williams, like that I can't, and it's shameful. I can't remember the name, but that was like the first mass
right.
timber high rise. And then right next to it is the Canyon project, which I think is senior housing or 55 plus. So there's a few in North Portland there.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess I'd like to see more mass timber as a substitute for concrete. My concern is that when it's substituting for wood frame construction, which some of these shorter buildings would be, it is worse for the environment. It's more timber, the foundation's heavier, it costs more money. It's, you have to put the insulation outside the building instead of inside the walls. You have to run your electrical conduit, electrical plumbing, all that stuff somewhere else because you can't run it through the wood. It's like there's a lot of reasons why, if you look at the environmental research out there, if you're substituting for concrete, it's great. It lowered carbon footprint. If you're substituting for light frame wood construction, it's not as good. So my concern is that if we're doing this for like environmental reasons, if that's the stated goal, then we should make sure that it actually has an environmental benefit. And I think that for taller buildings, it could. This could be, I would be happy to try and figure out a way to kind of groom this so that you're substituting for concrete building. In that case, then I can be in favor of this thing. But if it just broadly applies, because I think some of the examples we just heard of housing being built with mass timber that are shorter buildings, it's because it's the sexy thing for foundations and cities to fund right now. And there's a thought that it's environmentally better, but the data I've seen doesn't show that. I think there's some chasing going on. So luckily we have Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I mean, maybe the sustainability people would have an opinion about this. But from discussions I've been having, it feels like if the reason for this is environmental reasons, then we should make sure that there's an environmental benefit.
and you still have a concrete core, shear element, steel brace frame. There's, it's not just all mass timber. And
Right.
like you said about the foundation's significantly stouter.
Which is more concrete. And oftentimes you build another wall just inside of the wall to run your utilities in it. Like you built the light frame wall also. So it's something that hasn't got enough scrutiny. And I'm just raising my hand, just like, before we put this as zoning code, make sure there's a real benefit there.
And so Commissioner Spivak, I agree with you that like we should actually like look at the analysis here. I question your comment or view that this would be a replacement for wood framing because I don't see how that would be possible. And just trying to understand what you see as a tall building because at 75 feet or 85 feet, you're not doing a wood frame building then even at 65 feet, unless you're doing like 5/1
5/2.
or
Can't you go that-
5/2.
That's what I'm
Well,
thinking
yeah,
about.
but then that you're looking at like other carbon intensive materials, like a significant amount of carbon. And so then it's like, okay, well, is using mass timber in a whole building, except for the foundations, worth the avoided carbon of not doing the first, floor or two? And I think that that's valid. I just wanted to make sure I understood and that we were like kind of talking about the same thing because I don't feel like it would be I don't think that it would be cost favorable on many projects that weren't maxing out that height. So I feel like if people are going to use this, they're going to go to 75 feet, they're going to go to 85 feet. And then that is like a real amount of concrete that you're talking about or non-wood framing structure because you just can't go that high with wood framing.
Right. I think we agree on that. Yeah.
I'm curious who would have, from ignorance, who would have guidance? Is that, is U.S. Green Building Council doing studies on this?
I have opinions on this.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Oregon Department of Environmental Quality has a fantastic team for carbon stuff. I don't know if they're going to answer your question. The director of Earth Advantage knows this stuff. Mike Steffi, who's at Walls Construction, knows this stuff really well. I think we have some local people who know the science better than I do, for sure. And including the question that we just heard Commissioner Thompson raised, is that when you're having 2 floors of concrete and then 5 floors of wood, how does that fit into the equation?
And just for funsies, I just want to put out another idea, which is not nearly as sexy, but it would be allowing bonuses for reused wood framing, which is now allowed to be structurally graded, thanks in part to a lot of the efforts of BPS staff. And so, that would be indisputable in its environmental benefit, but probably has more complexity than we could take on here.
Please allow the record to show that Ariel just raised her eyebrow.
The eyebrow raise was because Lauren Onsted's been doing great work. So that's what that was about.
Other questions, thoughts? Okay.
I've lost track where I am. Oh, minimum density.
I might preempt you on this one again. Sorry, Morgan. I think that the impetus for this request for getting rid of minimum density is probably, as Commissioner Knowles has pointed out, if this is going to be a discussion, if we end up doing significant upzone to parts of the city like the Inner East Side, where there's currently single-family homes, my concern is that the minimum densities currently on the books in like RM2 and 3 might not let you to add another unit onto that lot. So my one idea would be so I guess I'm proposing a discussion first for the scoping of the Inner East Side project, that if there is one idea would be to go back to the way Portland used to do it, where if you were going towards the minimum density, you were okay. So you could add another home on the lot, for example. Another approach would be to just look at those areas, because I wouldn't want to have a situation where someone has a house, they want to build a 5-plex on it. It's zoned for 4 stories high for a home number of units. They're not allowed to build 5 units on that lot. Sorry, they have to build more than that. I'm trying to avoid a situation where the delta between what's physically on the land and what is allowed to be built there may be allowed to be built there for a very good reason. Someone can't just build a 4 or 5-plex. That's the anticipated issue. I don't see that issue happening right now, but I could see it happening in the future if we do some upzoning some parts of the city. So maybe I'll leave it at that.
I'll just say I know someone who was in this loop and wanted to, add 2 or 3 units, but had to get to 5 before, and so ended up not doing any, which was, and she's, state senator. She knows her stuff.
Much of Laurel Horse has a minimum density of 5 units per 5,000 square foot lot, because some of it's kind of higher density. That we looked at a long time ago, and maybe that's one reason it's single-family homes in that area, because the delta wasn't enough to actually do that many units. Anyway, that's all.
One thing that just to try to daylight this potential. So in the memo, we note that Metro has a requirement. We can't eliminate minimum densities, but there are ways to shift capacity around as part of a larger planning process. So that's one way to potentially think about options for Inner East and a different minimum density approach there. But I don't want to step into that project scope.
I'll just note, to bring full circle, that the RM3 is 1 unit per 1,000 square feet of site area, and if you figure the Inner East Side has an average lot size of 5,000, that's a 5-unit building would be the minimum for scraping and starting over. So you're still in a pretty reasonable size project, and I forget how the rounding goes if you have a 4,000 square foot lot or a 4,500 square foot lot, how that gets you there. But the minimums are still a pretty small project, I guess is my point.
Okay. Last one, and we get to switch. This is Commissioner Alvarado. This question, I think, came up because in our presentation, we just had one bullet point that said changes to bike parking. Fair enough there. So the longer version of this is that much of the incentives that were previously included in the elderly and disabled housing chapter are being incorporated as bonuses in the base zones. We had additional FAR that was granted for accessible units and multiple bedroom units in that chapter. So that was being shifted over to the base zones, which means that those bonuses are more widely available to different types of projects, including elderly and disabled housing projects. But the one piece that was left behind was this lower bike parking requirement that applied to those projects. And so we basically just took a footnote and added it to the bike parking table that preserved that reduced bike parking requirement for those projects. So if there are additional questions about that, happy to field that. Great. Okay. Well, we get to circle back. Fast forward. So let's see if we can try to see where we are on some of these things. So there's 4 of these paths forward choices that we have to navigate through. The first is changes to the RM3 base zone, development standards, the FAR setbacks and open space. I think we heard a little bit of conversation around the timeliness of these changes, the relationship with the Inner East Side project. There's sort of a countervailing viewpoint that the changes aren't all that significant when we're talking about a small number of lots, but trying to weigh those two sort of competing points of view, see where the commission might be feeling about that. We have these 2 options lined up, so we generally recommend the policy changes be deferred to the Inner East planning process with more robust engagement. And I think just a little extension of that question, I think that Eli was raising, I think it's easier to expand the engagement to include an additional 500 lots while you're talking about a big planning area than it is to change 500 lots and then sort of ignore the larger bulk of area that would ultimately be affected by those changes. So a little on that. I think it's easier to expand to those 500 lots if we're going to talk about changes to those development standards as part of that project.
Well, presumably, if you're talking about the entire Inner East Side plus 500 lots.
Yeah.
Is what you're talking about. So obviously, there's a big discussion if you're changing the zone up to RM3 of everybody affected, which would be a lot, and potentially some small effects outside the area where you get, the politics might be very different, but because they're not part of the Inner East Side, but they're affected by that project. So people would have to be aware of that. That's what happens when we intersect maps with zoning.
Yep. Of course, the other option is to recommend staff move forward with those changes. We can prepare what those code amendments would look like.
Strong feelings?
I would be curious to see what the code amendment language would look like for option 2 going forward, just to be able to have the idea of what we would be voting on and what might be being left out or included in it.
Strong feelings?
Are you posing a question?
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm asking generally, is there I'm looking for a temperature of the room of option 1 or 2.
Ah,
Sound
okay.
good? Yeah.
Option 1 for me.
I'd be in favor of 1.
Richard Thompson?
Option 1.
Okay. Ames 1? Spivak, do you
I
have?
think I'm 1 too. Yeah.
Okay.
1.
one as well. Vice Chair Pollak, how do you feel if we,
I'm totally okay with option one as well. I was
Okay.
just kind of curious
No,
to
it's-
to hear the more fleshed out offerings potentially in option two.
All right. Sounds good.
thank you.
Okay, next one is the changes to the step-down heights. Pretty simple set of options, either no change, changing or removing the step-down height when, as part of the package of incentives when bonuses are being used. And the third option kind of reflects back to the first conversation, but remove the step-down height limit from the base zone requirements.
Any strong feelings? 1, 2, or 3? Yeah, Commissioner Hall. 1? 1?
I want to think about two.
Okay. Is anyone keen on 3? Okay, well, we have done that. How about Commissioner Thompson and then Chief Planner Diefendorfer?
Yeah, this is a sort of like new thing that we're doing and to like feel out, do we want to explore amendments or not as a group? And it's probably a good thing. I mean, I think it's been a great conversation talking about all of this. I just want to make sure that it's clear to everyone that we don't need to agree as a commission for any one commissioner to work with staff to move forward a proposed amendment for our actual recommendation meeting if there's interest. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. We don't all need to bless it. It's perfectly reasonable if you're interested in seeing what the language would look like to have that developed and bring it back.
Oh, Commissioner Thompson, I appreciate you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I think it's kind of getting what I was hoping for was getting a general, like, is there work that does not need to be done right now or just a general sense? But that you're absolutely right. We don't need to foreclose, like, we're not foreclosing on anything. This is not a formal proposal. We're in scoping the next conversation mode, to the best of my understanding, correct? Okay, please. Chief.
Chair Roth, thank you. I wanted to also, I was going to bring up what Commissioner Thompson just brought up, which just is this feeling a little bit like a vote when we're not really voting right now. I think this idea, we're just trying to expedite the next conversation. It may be better if we take the approach of like, here's the options, and is anyone wanting to propose an amendment? And then that's what we can start from there. 'Cause if there's somebody who wants to propose amendment, then obviously we would work up the amendment and we would take the vote as we normally do. If there's no one that speaks up and says they want an amendment, then we'll assume that the broader consensus is that no change is being pursued at this time.
And there's a couple people not here too,
Correct.
who might bring up any of these things.
Right.
No, that's absolutely right.
No.
To say that, oh, there we go. Yeah, I was just going to say that in the next slide, we are outlining a timeline by which, as we typically do, for commissioners to get in touch with us if they want to really pursue an amendment. So we'll still lay that out with and we'll follow up with an email from Autumn. So that will ensure that people who are not here also have that opportunity.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. I did not mean to overstep. I did not mean to foreclose. I just, trying to get an idea of where staff's valuable time.
Yeah, and I apologize that we didn't frame it up that way for you,
No,
but
please.
yes, certainly.
Dr. Alvarado, please.
Yeah, for this one, I definitely lean towards 1, but with 2 being like, thinking about the unintended consequences, I can't conceptualize those. So I don't know what I would need to conceptualize them or like, but I definitely know that that's compelling to me, just the idea of unintended consequences.
Great. Other thoughts?
Okay, so it sounds like there's some interest in seeing what that would look like.
Yeah, the ones in the twos.
All right, next up, with regard to adding a moderate income social housing bonus, staff's recommendation is to allow the work currently underway to continue in order to better understand and define social housing and identify what a package of incentives might look like that were appropriate. We could adopt state model code language, but even the state doesn't have a solid understanding of what that, of its economic and implementation feasibility, so there are challenges there. We could also attempt to restructure the affordability bonuses, but again, a fair amount of analysis would be needed to understand the economics and relationship with the zoning bonus requirements to leverage those projects. Yeah, and just to reiterate, it's unlikely for market rate developers to build homes for the 0 to 30% MFI household. So kind of something else to be thinking about in terms of how these bonuses would be utilized.
Anyone have strong feelings? I heard a few people during our conversation say waiting for a social housing study, letting that cook a bit, but again, not wanting to foreclose.
I'm definitely of the mind with option one when it comes to moderate income and the social housing bonus, just so we're not overstepping with information we don't yet have fully. I think it would be better to come with all this information once it's completed in hand to start working on that.
And then, I mean, were you saying that Title 33 doesn't have any reference to tenure at this point, and this would be introducing that in option two?
I don't think we would. I think the zoning code amendments would be tenure neutral, and the Housing Bureau programs would have to establish or describe the eligibility for the tenure requirements.
Okay, thank you. And part of this is percolating, I believe, September 4th is when, between now and September 4th is when staff would love, if there's anything percolating here that would like to you would like to rise to an amendment to work with staff, this is your percolation time between, over the next week.
Got one more for you.
Yes.
So the changes to the accessible and multiple bedroom bonuses, just the way we described them in the presentation in the memo. Staff is recommending keeping the unit size consistent with the recommended central city bonus. And I think we heard acknowledgement that was agreeable, at least from Commissioner Spivak. So option one would be no change. Option two is to change the accessible or multiple bedroom bonus to allow a project to double up. And then, of course, our recommendation is not to make changes to the specifications of the accessibility unit types themselves.
I will say for myself, I would, it might not necessarily go to an amendment, but I feel I don't know. I crave knowing more than I know currently about accessibility and particularly accessibility bonuses. So that's something I would love to follow up with on.
I might be interested in doubling up just the accessibility.
Commissioner Ames, I feel I cut you off.
I like the multiple bedroom one too.
Okay.
Well, if we do one, it's just as easy to do the other,
And double up the double
While
up.
we're there.
Yeah.
just in terms of the code.
I
Okay.
concur with Commissioner, sorry to interrupt you.
No, no.
I concur with Commissioner Ames. We generally want units with both more bedrooms and if they can be more accessible. It's bonuses for everyone.
Okay.
It's like Oprah bonuses, just.
Making it rain.
All right. Next steps.
What,
Oh.
what, if anything, do you want back on the mass timber, planned development mass timber?
Thank you.
I want to work on an amendment for that one.
Okay. All right, next step. So as Chair Routh mentioned, September 4th is your final deadline to provide requests for amendments. So you can reach out to either Ariel or myself. We will work hastily to get those prepared by the 15th, publish them. And then on the 22nd, we'll have our second work session, hopefully conclude with a recommendation, and we'll formulate a recommended draft and take that to city council in the winter. And that's it. Those are the next steps.
A quick question. As far as requests for amendments, is saying, hey, I need a little bit more clarity on what this means, or that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, if you have a particular idea you want to explore more, or you need more information about something, questions about something, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to work that out with you.
I'm thinking like something like, would this be possible to display visually so I could understand? We could understand. Is that reasonable? Okay. Perfect.
That's it.
Anything else? That's it? Could we get out before 8 p.m.?
We could do it again.
Well, yeah.
Awesome.
What
Terrence,
other ideas do we have?
It's because we usually have more than one item, right? So we actually had the luxury of having one item today and to be able to go into it with a lot of detail. Yeah.
Any other questions, thoughts for the good of the order? Okay. So we'll, again, if September 4 is our, as our best buy time for amendment ideas, and we will continue this item to September 22nd. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.